Right, welcome everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. I'm Melody Garcia, and welcome to this segment of GRT Quick Bites, 20-minute topics in early learning. So these are micro-learning opportunities intended to help you amp up your early literacy programs and shine a light on early learning. Today's topic is process over product. I'm exploring the magic of open-ended creativity. So I'm Melody Garcia, and I'm with Growing Readers Together, which is an initiative of the Colorado State Library. And I'm part of the regional early literacy support team for Growing Readers Together, along with Kate Brunner and Gail Yerbick, who you may know if you've joined us for some of our other Quick Bites. A little background on Growing Readers Together and our mission. Our work stems from a study that estimated 57% of children under 6 in Colorado are cared for informally by family members, friends, and neighbors, referred to as FFN caregivers. Growing Readers Together is working to prioritize library service to FFN providers, helping libraries connect with this group and expand their early literacy knowledge and access. Because quite likely, these informal caregivers are already in your library. And the public library is perfectly situated to support early learning, particularly for children in informal care who lack those professional support systems. It's our hope that by making early literacy transparent and accessible in all Colorado libraries, every child can have access to early learning opportunities, regardless of their care situation. So let's dig into one way your library can enhance its early learning offering by shifting your crafts from product-based to process-based. And this is really of interest to reaching out to those FFN caregivers because these conversations about process art and messy learning are happening right now among professional childcare providers. It's actually becoming one of those attributes that we look for in the highest quality of care centers. However, FFN caregivers are rarely part of that conversation unless they've sought out that information. And so having this experience at the library can really open up new opportunities for children and their caregivers. But I've met a number of librarians who shy away from process art because they assume it has to be a big production and a big mess. But I would say not so. I think of process art as a spectrum. It's really just a different way of thinking about crafts and creativity, and it can range from very messy to really quite contained and manageable. So as we explore why process art is so beneficial to developing minds, I want us to also keep in mind that there are easy ways to integrate process art into your existing early learning and craft programs. It's also important to remember that as we change our mindset about how children can interact with art, also we want to be having those conversations with caregivers so that they can also start changing their perspectives. But first, let's just clarify what we mean when we talk about product versus process. According to the Museum of Contemporary Art, in process art, the means count for more than the ends. So when we're talking about process art, we're really putting the focus on the experience and the skills that children are practicing as they do the art. Now, this is important from an early learning standpoint because we want to ask ourselves, why do we do crafts? What is it that we want children to be gaining from that experience? In product-based crafts, the answer to that question is a beautiful product. We want kids to go home with something that will look beautiful on the fridge, something that is gift worthy. In the end, we want the child to replicate a sample craft and make something that looks a certain way. Now, there are benefits to product-based crafts. Children do learn sequencing, following instructions, perhaps there's a certain concept that can be reinforced. But ultimately, there is a right and a wrong way to complete the craft. So this also means that there's a certain level of skill that is required. And when children lack these skills or background knowledge, the result can be a frustrated child. or a caregiver correcting a child's art, and in some cases actually taking over and doing the craft for the child. Now, I will add that the reverse can be true. The result could be a very proud child who made a fridge-worthy keepsake. And I'm not saying we should never do crafts with a product in mind, just that we should question if that product is really our goal. Because often what we want from the crafts we do in the library is for children to practice their fine motor skills, or develop creativity, or just to have fun. And that will happen more readily if we focus on the process of making art rather than the product. In process art, there is no sample. That can be a really hard habit to make, but once you put a sample in, you're setting a goal for that child to achieve, instead of allowing children to make their own discoveries and even sort of experience art as science, finding out what happens when I mix all the colors together or pile everything on top. It is open-ended, and children are free to be creative and be unique. No two pieces of art will look the same. It also gives an entry point for children of all ages and ability. Children who are more advanced are going to use their skills to create more complicated works. But other children can still use the materials provided and engage in their own style of art without feeling that they're not doing it correctly. And process art can still lead to a beautiful product, but sometimes it leads to a big brown blob, and that's okay. A lot of times children are also going to be very proud of that big brown blob. Oop, went too far. Let's go back. All right, so process art is really important these days because earlier and earlier children are being given very academic and structured tasks. What children need is more freedom to be creative and engage in what is often referred to as messy learning. In the words of Miss Frizzle, it's time to take chances, make mistakes, and get messy. And messy learning refers to many aspects of education, not just art. But messy learning always allows for mistakes to be made and empowers children to explore, discover, and create. Now, we're there to encourage creativity, but we're also allowing children to think critically and problem solve. They get to be the ones to answer the question of, what will I make? What can I do with all of these materials? And if we're allowing children to really get physically messy as well, we're also activating their senses, which for our youngest learners is really a key element to their development. Now, I can't stress enough that when we talk about messy learning, messy art, that mess is optional. It doesn't always need to be paint splatters everywhere. But it does mean that there's less structure and less instruction. One of my favorite go-to process art projects is a collage. You can use different colors, different shapes, different textures. I love using nature treasures like leaves and flower petals. But this simple, low-mess project still allows for messy thinking. We're still practicing unstructured creativity because those objects can come together in any way the children can imagine. There's no expected outcome. Whether a child wants to just glue 5 pieces and be done, or really immerse themselves in piling it all on top, any way they approach it is correct and exactly what they need. Our role as facilitators is just to provide materials, launch the activity, and then encourage exploration. And this encouragement is best done through open-ended questions, which is another bonus point for process crafts. Not only are we hitting their writing skills and their fine motor skills, there's also a lot of talking that can happen and a lot of storytelling. When you're talking with a young artist, just some really go-to questions that you can do with their art, is just really, can you tell me about your art? And a lot of times they are creating something that has a story behind it. And that's something you're not going to get if everyone is creating a penguin. Another really great sentence structure that I use is just I notice. I find that just saying I notice can be a really powerful statement for young children. I notice you're using a lot of green. And just kind of let it hang there and see what happens. If you are getting really messy and sensory, asking kids, like, how does that feel? Art isn't just visual. It can also be a very kinesthetic, a very sensory experience. And just asking them, what did you enjoy most about your creation? Really asking them about that process. Now, some children you will find are more hesitant to dive in, depending on their past experiences with art. With that, our open-ended questions can really come in as well. Also kind of co-creating with them. And it's really important to know when a child is fully engaged and they don't need further encouragement. And when they're a little bit more hesitant, sharing what you like about the materials can be helpful. Taking some of the materials, making your own splat, sticking things yourself, and kind of doing those demonstrations side by side. It's not telling them what they should be doing, but it's opening some windows into what they could do with those materials. Equally important is conversations with the caregiver. We want caregivers to understand how process art is different from a traditional craft. Not only is this going to make caregivers more comfortable with the program, but it will also hopefully plant a seed that they will carry home. A few scenarios that I've encountered doing process art are caregivers who want to stop the artist. A lot of times when that creation is happening, their art reaches a point that is very aesthetically pleasing to our adult eye. And there is this desire to be like, oh no, stop, it's beautiful, I want it just the way it is. But the child isn't interested in the aesthetics. The child is just interested in dropping that watercolor and the experience of watching it splatter and spread. So if you notice that happening, I've found that taking photos can be a great intermediary. Just saying, hey, what if we pause and just take a photo? Because your child is really enjoying or discovering or really engaged in the process of, splattering or scribbling or whatever it is they're doing. And that experience is why we're here today. You'll also still find a lot of caregivers that want to help, that even without an example, see the materials and create their own product that they want to encourage and teach their child to do. So really stepping in and being like, there's no right or wrong way to engage with the materials. They might not want to, do what we think is expected of them. But they're learning by exploring the materials, and that's really why we're here today. And a lot of caregivers are just really interested in understanding what process art is, especially if you're advertising a process art program. You're going to get caregivers that come to me like, what is this? What is process art? And to try and make this a little bit more interactive for us today, if anyone here has their own experience with process art, or just kind of from what we've said today, how would you answer that question? If you want to utilize the chat box on your left, I would love to hear some responses from you all as well. I think we'd probably get a few really good ones. If you want to take a minute and type in the chat box, what would you say to a parent who doesn't get process art or wants to know more about process art? And then I'll put in my response as well. And I'd love to hear your responses too. Here we got one from Jessica. It's an opportunity to enjoy and focus on the process of making rather than the result. Nice. And I'm going to put mine in the chat box as well. And feel free to keep adding as we go on because these will pop up. We'll be able to see them. And again, if you missed, right above our chat box, there's the Process Art handout PDF. So I have these questions as well as some others in there as well for you to reference back to. I like to say that, process art allows children to enjoy the creation of art, so very similar to what Jessica said, without worrying about what the result should be. Sometimes what they make is amazing, but it's the experience that matters. I really always try to bring it back to that experience or back to specific skills if there's something that I'm really focusing on with their skills. And Andrea says, today we have no goal in mind. It's all about the moment. Oh, I like that, it being about the moment. Thank you so much for sharing. So let's take a look at how you can make this happen in your libraries. So if you have the capacity, I really would encourage you to offer a dedicated process art program, whether it's monthly or weekly, whatever, or even seasonally, because it will be the most fun that you have had in your library. And there are benefits to being free to just make that mess. A lot of children don't get this freedom at home, whether it's due to caregivers who are hesitant about mess or a lack of access to art supplies. Being able to really just throw paint around is a very new experience to a lot of children. And these programs also really open up the conversation about process art, which is how you're going to change how caregivers think about art and think about crafts in the library. If it's something that you want to take on, a few best practices that I've found is really introducing a skill focus and taking that time before your program begins to be like, introduce the different activities that you have planned and really focus on that skill. At this station, like we've got scissors out because, cutting is something that kids are going to be expected to do in kindergarten, but they don't always get to practice. Or over here we've got eyedroppers because that squeezing motion, that's their pincer grip. That's how it's going to come to holding pencils later on. And also explain the caregiver's role. A lot of times caregivers don't know how to fit themselves into a process-based program. So really letting them know you're here to observe your child, inquire and ask questions with your child, and encourage them, but let your child take the lead. I really like having stations. 3 has been my magic number, and they can be thematic or not. I found it's often good to vary the degree of messiness because different children have different needs as far as their sensory exposure. And so having a few crafts that are not as messy and sensory immersive can be really good for those children. It's awesome if you can find a picture book tie-in. And that's also just a great way to kind of set the tone at the beginning, get the children together with a little story. And I really open it up to all ages. One of the great things about process art is that it can be so adapted to children depending on their ages and their abilities. But it is not necessary to have a dedicated program to do process art. Process art can be integrated into any program that you run that has a craft component. And it's really just a matter of reevaluating those crafts. Is your goal to teach a theme or concept? Or is it just to develop creativity? Is your goal to really have every child walk home with something that looks similar because it's a Mother's Day gift? Or are there any elements in there that can be expanded? Are there just pieces of your craft that you can open up to encourage creative thought to make more unique products? The example up there was from a program I did on dinosaurs. And, even though we had some more formal crafts of really following these steps to make a fossil, I also just took some dinosaurs and paint and they made dinosaur footprints. And this was one of our most popular stations. If you have a craft area in your library that sort of always has a craft going on, I highly recommend the box of shapes. That's really all it is a box with all different shapes. I use a lot of pieces from past crafts. All those little leftover pieces just get dumped in the box. If you have teen volunteers, a great way to fill those last 20 minutes of their shift is just to give them some paper and say, cut out some squares, cut out some triangles, punch some circles. And then you take all these random colors, shapes, put them in a box with some glue sticks and half sheets of paper, and you have an intriguing craft that really kids from 2 to 12 can engage in and just find out, what will you make with all of these shapes? We even at my library started making our storytime crafts more process-based, and this kind of came up to our process light, which really is more controlled than you would think of with a process art project because storytellers wanted to keep to the theme. But by just kind of dictating what supplies are out, what shapes we give them, we're able to open that up and be like, look, we're all going to try and make a robot, we're all going to try and make a bug, but everyone's going to be different because we're, again, not using a sample. We're just looking at these materials and creating our own. And now we are running a little long. I apologize for that. We're going to flash through our inspiration slides. And I also, again, want to point out right above our chat box, there's our process art handout. There's a lot more details about these art projects that you'll see up here, different ways to engage with paint, different ways to paint without brushes, bringing in different materials like sandpaper, contact paper, bringing nature elements into your art can really open up our process. Also, this idea of having art with no product, making shadow art, doing loose parts like rocks that kids can stack or buttons that they can arrange in patterns. We did an amazing thing of painting spaghetti. We actually painted on the spaghetti. A note with that, do know your neighborhood, your community. If food scarcity is an issue in your community, painting on food, not the most compassionate choice, but know your community. It can be a lot of fun if you can do it. And when we take away the product altogether, this really helps caregivers let go of that idea of making fridge-worthy products and really gets them to enjoy and appreciate the creative process. And all these ideas and more are on the handout. So take a look at that. Always feel free to reach back and contact me as well. Now, this was the last of our fall series of Quick Bites, but if there are any of the 6 that you missed, you can catch up on the archive. And we are looking to resume in mid to late November, though we don't have a set schedule right now. Our next adventure in Growing Readers Together is a 4-part series on how to really do that outreach part to connect with the family, friend, neighbor community. And that is going to be a 4-part series on Tuesdays at noon, a little longer, a full hour for those, starting October 15th. And I want to thank you all again for joining us here today. Do check out that handout, and if you have a minute, we do welcome your input, especially because we are looking to continue this into the future. We would really love to hear what you think about Quick Bites. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I'll be around if anyone does need to not rush off. If there are any questions that you had, feel free to use the chat box, and I will be here for a few minutes more. Thank you so much.